Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Before we settle in for tonight's journey, if you genuinely enjoy relaxing history that helps you unwind or drift off to sleep, I'd really appreciate it if you took a second to like this video and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and allows me to keep creating these long, peaceful history stories for you, and I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you. I always enjoy reading your comments and seeing listeners joining from all around the world. Now, tonight, we're leaving behind Rome's magnificent temples, its crowded marketplaces, its luxurious villas, and the roaring cheers of the Colosseum. Instead, we're walking somewhere very few Romans ever wanted to see, a prison. Most people imagine ancient Rome as a place filled with powerful emperors, legendary gladiators, and impressive marble buildings, but hidden beneath all that greatness was a much darker world, a place where sunlight barely reached, where heavy iron chains echoed through stone corridors, where the air smelled of damp stone, cold earth, and fear. Imagine waking up one ordinary morning, only to find yourself accused of a crime. Within hours, your hands are bound, a Roman guard leads you through the crowded streets, and before the sun sets, a heavy wooden door closes behind you. Tonight, we'll discover what it was really like to be a prisoner in ancient Rome. For just a moment, breathe slowly, and picture yourself standing at the edge of the greatest city the ancient world had ever known. The morning sun glows softly across rooftops covered with reddish clay tiles. Marble temples catch the golden light. Water splashes gently from public fountains. Merchants arrange baskets of olives, figs, and fresh bread while distant voices blend into one endless murmur that drifts through the streets. To almost everyone around you, Rome is a place of opportunity. To senators, it is the heart of power. To merchants, it is a place where fortunes are made. To soldiers returning from distant frontiers, it is home. But today, Rome feels very different. You aren't free to admire its beauty. Your wrists ache beneath rough rope. Every curious glance from strangers reminds you that something has changed forever. The city continues its busy rhythm without slowing for your misfortune. Children laugh, dogs wander between market stalls, a blacksmith strikes glowing iron with steady blows. Life moves on, even as yours quietly slips into uncertainty. Ancient Rome believed deeply in law and order. Justice was visible everywhere, from magistrates seated in public squares to soldiers patrolling busy roads. Punishments were often meant not only to discipline the guilty, but also to remind everyone watching that the authority of Rome reached into every corner of daily life. Yet prisons themselves were never intended to be places where long sentences were served. That surprises many people today. Most Roman prisons existed simply to hold people while they waited, waiting for trial, waiting for questioning, waiting for punishment, or simply waiting for someone powerful enough to decide their fate. Some prisoners would leave alive, others never would, as the streets narrow. The magnificent buildings begin to disappear behind taller stone walls. The cheerful sounds of commerce fade little by little. The air grows cooler, damper, even quieter. Your footsteps echo now, joined by the measured pace of the guards beside you. Ahead stands a building few citizens ever wished to enter. Its thick walls reveal little of what lies inside. No grand statues decorate its entrance. No welcoming torches burn brightly. Only weathered stone, a reinforced wooden door, and silence. This place exists almost separately from the glittering empire surrounding it, hidden in plain sight like a secret everyone knows but few discuss. You hesitate for the briefest moment, not because you expect mercy, but because once that door closes, the familiar world outside may already begin to feel like a distant memory. The guard reaches forward, iron hinges groan slowly. Darkness waits beyond the threshold. and with one quiet step, your journey into Rome's forgotten world finally begins. The great wooden door closes behind you, not with a violent crash, but with a slow, deliberate thud that seems to erase the sounds of the city outside. For a lingering moment, you stand completely still, the laughter from the markets, the clatter of wagon wheels, the distant calls of merchants, all of it fades into silence, as though Rome itself has quietly forgotten you. The air is cooler here, it carries the scent of damp limestone, old timber, extinguished torch smoke, and the faint metallic smell of rusted iron. A guard motions for you to continue walking. There are no explanations, no comforting words, only footsteps echoing through narrow corridors carved from thick stone. As you move deeper inside, one question gently settles into your thoughts. How did you arrive here? Perhaps it happened because of something you truly did, or perhaps because of something someone else claimed you did. In ancient Rome, the line between guilt and accusation was sometimes far thinner than anyone wished to believe. Rome prided itself on being a civilization governed by law. Citizens admired the order of its courts, its magistrates, and its written legal traditions. From the Grand Forum to the smallest provincial town, justice was meant to demonstrate the strength of the Republic, and later, the Empire. Yet justice depended greatly upon who you were: a respected senator, a wealthy merchant, a decorated soldier, a poor laborer, or a foreign traveler with no influential friends. The law could look very different to each of them. Imagine waking before sunrise as you always had. You open your small workshop, perhaps you shape pottery, perhaps you repair sandals, perhaps you simply carry heavy sacks of grain along the river docks. It begins as an ordinary day. Then strangers appear, a neighbor points toward you, a merchant insists that silver coins have disappeared, someone claims they saw your face near the scene. Whether they truly recognized you, or merely believed they did, becomes difficult to separate. In a crowded city approaching 1 million people, rumors often traveled faster than certainty. Sometimes accusations arose from genuine crimes. Theft was common. Violence sometimes erupted in narrow streets after sunset. Fraud could ruin families. Escaped slaves were hunted relentlessly. Counterfeit coins circulated through busy markets. Rome punished such offenses seriously because order held the empire together. But not every prisoner entered because of obvious wrongdoing. Debt alone could become a heavy burden. A failed harvest, an unlucky investment, or a business partner who disappeared with borrowed money, any of these could drag a once respected citizen into legal trouble. Although debt laws changed over the centuries, financial disputes remained capable of destroying peaceful lives. Politics created dangers of another kind. Careless words spoken during dinner, an insult overheard by the wrong person, support for an unsuccessful official, even silence could invite suspicion during uncertain times. Under some emperors, accusations of disloyalty spread quietly through Rome like cold winter fog. Few people knew exactly where safety ended. Even soldiers were not immune. Desertion, disobedience, failure during battle. The Roman army demanded remarkable discipline. Those who broke military law could discover that their own commanders became their judges. Foreigners often faced even greater uncertainty. Visitors from distant provinces sometimes struggled to understand Roman customs, contracts, or legal procedures. A simple misunderstanding, a language barrier, or an unfamiliar local tradition could suddenly become a very serious matter. And then there was simple bad luck, being in the wrong street, at the wrong hour, standing beside the wrong crowd. History rarely remembers those quiet moments when ordinary lives changed forever through coincidence alone. No marble monument records them. No poet writes their names. Yet countless prisoners likely entered Roman cells without believing that morning would end in chains. The guard ahead finally pauses. He unlocks another iron gate with practiced ease. Its hinges complain softly as it swings open. Beyond it, the passage grows darker still. You realize that everyone inside these walls carries a different story. One man insists he is innocent, another admits his crime without regret. Someone else says nothing at all. From the outside, every prisoner may appear the same. Inside, each one has traveled a very different road, and now, your own story has quietly become part of theirs. Somewhere ahead, unseen voices drift through the darkness. Low murmurs, the distant cough, the scrape of iron against stone. You cannot yet see the faces waiting beyond the corridor. But before you meet the people imprisoned beside you, there is one final journey still to make, the walk from freedom to the cell itself. The murmurs behind the iron gate slowly fade, not because the voices disappear, but because your thoughts grow louder. A moment ago, you were wondering how you came to be here. Now, another memory begins to surface, the journey itself, not the walk through these prison corridors, but the one that brought you here from the streets of Rome. It began long before darkness fell, long before the heavy doors, long before the cold scent of damp stone. It began with a hand resting firmly upon your shoulder, no shouting, no dramatic struggle, just the unmistakable weight of Roman authority. You remember turning to find two guards standing beside you, their expressions calm and unreadable. Their polished helmets caught the afternoon sunlight, while the red-dyed edges of their cloaks stirred gently in the warm breeze. One guard spoke only a few words. "You are to come with us," nothing more. In ancient Rome, an arrest did not always resemble the scenes we imagine today. There were no flashing alarms or crowded courtrooms waiting nearby. Everything depended on who you were, who accused you, and what offense was believed to have been committed. Sometimes a magistrate issued an official order, sometimes local officials carried out the arrest, and sometimes soldiers themselves intervened if public order appeared threatened. Whatever the reason, once authority had reached you, refusing rarely ended well. As the guards guided you through the streets, people noticed. Not everyone stared openly. Many simply glanced for a heartbeat before returning to their own business. A baker continued kneading dough, a woman filled a clay jar at a public fountain, children chased one another between market stalls, their laughter untouched by your unfolding fate. Life in Rome was astonishingly busy. One more prisoner passing through its streets was hardly enough to stop an ordinary day, yet some faces lingered. An elderly man watched silently from beneath the shade of a column, a fruit seller. Quietly lowered her eyes, a young apprentice paused his sweeping, curiosity written plainly across his face. No one knew your full story, most never would. In a city this vast, appearances often became their own form of judgment. Bound hands suggested guilt, few questioned what had happened before the ropes were tied. The streets themselves seemed strangely different now. Roads you had walked countless times suddenly felt unfamiliar. Every familiar corner carried the quiet ache of knowing you might never see it again. The aroma of warm bread drifting from nearby ovens, the fragrance of crushed herbs sold in the market, even the distant scent of wood smoke rising from household kitchens. Each ordinary smell settled into your memory with unexpected clarity. It is curious how the mind preserves simple moments when uncertainty arrives. As the afternoon slowly faded, the crowds began to thin. The grand avenues gave way to narrower lanes lined with aging stone buildings. The polished marble of public monuments became less frequent. Here, the city felt older, quieter, less concerned with impressing visitors, more concerned with function. The guards remained almost entirely silent, professional, steady. For them, this was another ordinary duty among many. Roman guards escorted merchants, officials, prisoners, tax collectors, and visiting dignitaries every week. Experience had taught them that conversation rarely changed the destination. Occasionally, one adjusted the rope around your wrists, not to cause pain, but to ensure you remain securely under control. Even small acts revealed Rome's preference for discipline over unnecessary cruelty. As evening approached, long shadows stretched across the paving stones. The lively sounds of the forum faded behind you. Instead, quieter noises emerged, the creaking of wooden carts carrying supplies, the flutter of pigeons nesting beneath roof tiles, the distant barking of dogs. Somewhere beyond the city walls, above everything else, the measured rhythm of sandals striking stone, step after step, without hurry, without pause. Ancient Roman prisons were rarely placed where citizens gathered to celebrate. They stood near centers of government or military authority, close enough for officials to oversee them, yet distant enough that most people preferred not to think about those held inside. The building finally came into view. Its walls were thick, its windows few. Time itself seemed to rest upon the weathered stones. There was nothing magnificent about it, no carved statues, no colorful banners, only strength, only permanence. Only the quiet certainty that many had entered before you. Very few had done so willingly. One guard stepped forward and knocked 3 times upon the heavy wooden door. From within, bolts shifted, iron scraped against iron. The entrance opened just wide enough to admit you. For one final heartbeat, you looked back. The evening sky above Rome glowed with soft shades of amber and fading blue. Swallows circled high above the rooftops. Somewhere beyond the winding streets, life continued exactly as it always had, but that world already felt impossibly distant. The guard gave a gentle nod, not unkind, simply inevitable. You crossed the threshold, the door closed behind you. And the first true chapter of imprisonment quietly began. The heavy door settles shut behind you, its deep echo lingers through the stone passage, then silence returns, not complete silence, never complete. Somewhere ahead, water drips with patient rhythm, a chain shifts against rough stone, someone coughs in the darkness. The prison is already speaking, not with words, but with the quiet sounds of lives paused between freedom and whatever fate awaits. A guard removes the rope from your wrists only long enough to replace it with heavier iron restraints. The cold metal closes around your skin with practiced efficiency, neither cruel nor gentle. It is simply another routine, performed countless times before your arrival. Without a word, you are led farther inside. The corridor narrows, the ceiling lowers, torchlight flickers across damp walls, revealing centuries of smoke stains that have darkened the stone. The air feels strangely still, as though it has forgotten what fresh wind smells like. Outside, Rome was alive with sunlight and movement. Here, time seems reluctant to move at all. Many people today imagine Roman prisons as places built for long-term confinement, with rows of individual cells much like modern prisons. The reality was very different. Imprisonment itself was usually temporary. These dark chambers were holding places where people waited for questioning, judgment, punishment, or execution. Comfort was never part of their purpose. As you continue walking, you notice that the walls are not smooth marble like those decorating Rome's temples. They are rough blocks of volcanic stone, fitted together with remarkable strength but little concern for appearance. Moisture clings to every surface. In some places, tiny patches of moss have found enough life to grow between the cracks. The smell is impossible to ignore: damp earth, old straw, smoke, sweat, rusting iron, and beneath it all, the faint scent of too many people sharing too little space. The guard pauses before a thick wooden barrier. He lifts a simple iron latch. The door opens slowly. This is where you will wait. The room is smaller than you expected. Not because Rome lacked the ability to build grand structures, but because dignity was never meant to exist here. The ceiling hangs low overhead. Only a single narrow opening high in the wall allows a thin ribbon of daylight to enter. Dust drifts lazily through the pale beam, disappearing long before it reaches the floor. For much of the day, the chamber lives in twilight. At night, darkness claims nearly everything. The floor beneath your feet is uneven stone, worn smooth by countless footsteps across generations. There are no wooden beds waiting in neat rows. No blankets folded carefully in a corner, only scattered bundles of aging straw, some fresh enough to soften the stone. Others little more than brittle fragments. In wealthier Roman households, floors were decorated with colorful mosaics depicting sea creatures, flowers, and gods. Here, the only patterns are cracks. The walls tell their own quiet stories. Faint scratches mark the stone. Perhaps someone counted the passing days. Perhaps they carved initials. Perhaps they simply wished to leave behind proof that they had once existed. Time has blurred nearly all of those marks into mystery. You wonder how many hands touched these walls before yours. Hundreds, thousands, no one could say. Ventilation was poor in many Roman prisons. During the heat of summer, the air became heavy and difficult to escape. In winter, cold moisture settled into the stone itself, creeping slowly into clothing, bones, and restless thoughts. The prison seemed to belong to neither season. It was simply cold when the city was warm, and colder when the city was not. A rat darts briefly across the far corner before disappearing beneath a loose pile of straw. It moves confidently, as though it has lived here longer than any prisoner. Tiny insects hide in the cracks between stones. Spiders patiently weave their webs near the ceiling, disturbed only when guards carrying torches pass through the corridor. Even these small creatures appear perfectly at home. You are not. Outside these walls, Rome celebrates triumphs, conducts business, debates politics, and welcomes travelers from every corner of the empire. Inside, those distant lives become almost impossible to imagine. The prison shrinks your world to a few paces of stone. A narrow doorway, a sliver of fading light, and the quiet company of your own thoughts. The guard studies you for only a moment before stepping backward into the corridor. His expression reveals nothing. He closes the heavy door, iron settles against wood. The lock turns with a slow, deliberate click. Now, for the first time since your arrest, you are truly alone. Or so it seems, because somewhere beyond the darkness, another quiet sound reaches your ears. The faint rattle of chains, followed by the slow breathing of someone else, waiting in the shadows. The breathing beyond the darkness continues, slow, steady, a reminder that you are no longer the only soul enclosed within these ancient walls. For several moments, nothing else happens. No guard speaks, no door opens, only the occasional drip of water echoes through the prison, each drop measuring time more faithfully than any sundial outside ever could. Then, footsteps return, measured, unhurried. The heavy lock turns once more. Torchlight spills into your cell, pushing back the darkness just enough for two guards to step inside. One carries a small ring of iron keys, the other holds something heavier. At first, it appears to be little more than a bundle of dark metal. But as he draws closer, its purpose becomes unmistakably clear. Chains, cold, thick, worn smooth in places by years of use. Their weight seems almost impossible before they even touch your skin. One guard motions gently for you to extend your hands. You hesitate only for the briefest heartbeat, not out of defiance, but because some quiet part of your mind still hopes this moment might somehow pass. it does not. The iron closes around your wrists with a dull metallic click. Firm, secure, almost strangely ordinary. For the guards, this is simply another task among many. For you, it is the first undeniable feeling that freedom has become something physical. Something measured by the reach of a chain. Ancient Roman prisons relied heavily upon restraints. Thick walls alone could not guarantee security, especially when prisoners awaited questioning, trial, or punishment. Iron became another kind of wall, one that traveled with the prisoner wherever they went. Blacksmiths throughout the empire forged these restraints by hand. Every link was heated inside glowing furnaces, hammered carefully upon anvils, then cooled until the metal became remarkably strong. Some chains were simple, others included heavy connecting bars designed to make walking slow and exhausting. Durability mattered far more than comfort. The metal is cool now, but after hours against your skin, its presence becomes impossible to ignore. Every movement reminds you that it remains there. Shift your hands, the chain answers. Take a careful step, iron whispers against iron. Even standing still, its weight gently pulls downward. The sound becomes part of you. Not loud, not dramatic, simply constant. Many prisoners also wore shackles around their ankles. These varied in design depending on the circumstances. Some allowed careful walking, others shortened every step so severely that even crossing a small room demanded patience. It was less about causing pain, and more about removing possibility. Running became nearly impossible. Quick movements disappeared. Even simple balance required new habits. Every journey slowed to the pace chosen by Rome. Then there were iron collars. Not every prisoner wore one, but slaves awaiting punishment, escaped servants, and certain dangerous captives sometimes found heavy bands locked around their necks. Some collars carried inscriptions, simple messages engraved into the metal. If found, return me to my master. Those few words reveal something quietly heartbreaking. To the Romans, certain human beings could be treated almost like misplaced property. The collar itself often weighed several pounds. Sleeping with it could become uncomfortable. Turning your head required effort. Its presence reminded everyone nearby exactly who possessed authority, as torchlight flickers across your own restraints. You notice tiny imperfections in the iron. Small hammer marks, minute scratches. Perhaps another prisoner once struggled against these same links. Perhaps someone carried them only briefly before judgment arrived. Or perhaps these chains have passed through countless hands over many decades. Iron outlives memory. The guards finish their work without unnecessary conversation. One gives the chain a gentle tug, checking that every clasp sits securely. Satisfied, he nods quietly. There is no anger in his expression, no pleasure. Only routine. In Rome, duty often mattered more than emotion. Once they leave, silence settles again. You experiment carefully. One step, another. The chain follows. Its rhythm quickly teaches you new limits. You cannot forget it. Not even for a single moment. Soon, you begin adjusting naturally, lifting your hands differently, shortening your stride, turning more slowly. Human beings possess a remarkable ability to adapt, even to burdens they never imagined carrying. Outside, the empire stretches across mountains, rivers, deserts, and distant seas. Roman roads connect thousands of miles of provinces. Merchants travel freely. Messengers race between cities, legions march beneath open skies. Yet your entire world now extends only as far as a length of iron allows. The contrast feels almost impossible to comprehend. Hours drift quietly onward. Torchlight beneath the doorway fades as evening deepens. The stone floor grows colder beneath your feet. Instinct tells you to sit. You lower yourself carefully. mindful of the chains that settle with a soft metallic sigh upon the floor beside you. For the first time, you notice how tired your body has become, not from labor, not from battle, but from uncertainty. The iron itself has not wounded you. Its greatest weight rests somewhere else, inside your thoughts, because every gentle clink reminds you that tomorrow, and every day after, may begin with exactly the same sound. As the prison slips deeper into darkness, you slowly lean back against the cold stone wall. Your chains fall still, the silence returns, and with night finally approaching, another challenge quietly waits for you: sleep. Night passes slowly, not because time has stopped, but because every hour seems to stretch a little longer than the one before it. At some point, exhaustion finally overcomes your thoughts. Sleep comes in short, uneven moments, never deep enough to forget where you are, only enough to blur the darkness around you. Then, a distant bolt slides open, another answers farther down the corridor. Footsteps echo across the stone. Morning has arrived, not with birdsong, nor with warm sunlight spilling through a window, only with the familiar sound of iron keys. The narrow opening high in the wall allows a faint grey light to enter your cell. Dust floats lazily through the pale beam. And for the first time since your arrest, you can better see the room around you. The walls are older than they appeared in the torchlight. The stone bears stains left by countless winters and summers. The scattered straw has settled during the night. Even the chains around your wrists seem duller beneath the morning light. Then another sound reaches you, wood scraping against stone. A guard approaches carrying a simple basket, no silver tray, no steaming feast. Only the ordinary meal. That begins another ordinary day inside a Roman prison. He pauses outside your cell, opens the small hatch built into the heavy door, and slides the food inside without ceremony. The hatch closes again. The footsteps continue down the corridor. Every prisoner receives the same quiet visit. You look at what has been given: a coarse loaf of bread, small, dense, made from barley rather than the finer wheat enjoyed by wealthier Romans. Its crust is hard, its surface cracked from baking. Fresh bread sold in Rome's bustling bakeries filled entire streets with comforting aromas. This bread smells of little more than grain. Beside it rests a small clay cup filled with water, cool, clear enough, though hardly refreshing after a restless night. Water remained the simplest drink available inside prisons. Outside these walls, many Romans mixed wine with water during meals, believing it safer and more pleasant to drink. Prisoners, however, rarely enjoyed such comforts unless someone from outside provided them. Sometimes there is a handful of beans, sometimes a few olives, occasionally a small piece of onion or cabbage. The meal changes slightly depending on the prison, the season, and whoever happens to oversee supplies. But abundance is never the goal. The food is meant to keep you alive, not satisfied. You break the bread carefully. Its texture is surprisingly firm. Each bite demands patience. Chewing becomes slow work, and perhaps that is fortunate, because eating too quickly only reminds you how little there is. Still, after a long night, even plain bread carries unexpected comfort. Hunger has a quiet way of changing expectations. Ancient Roman prisons did not always provide generous meals from public funds. In many cases, prisoners relied heavily upon family members, friends, or patrons to bring additional food. Those fortunate enough to have relatives nearby often fared much better than those who stood entirely alone. A visit from family could mean fresh fruit, cheese, dried figures, a little oil for dipping bread. Even a small portion of cooked vegetables could transform an ordinary day into something memorable. But not everyone received visitors. Some prisoners came from distant provinces, others had no surviving family, some had simply been abandoned. For them, each meal looked much like the last. As the morning continues, you hear quiet sounds drifting from neighboring cells. Someone coughs. Another prisoner tears bread into careful pieces. A clay cup touches stone. No one speaks loudly. There seems little reason to waste energy. The prison itself encourages silence. Outside, Rome begins another busy day. Market stalls fill with fish caught before dawn. Bakers remove fresh loaves from glowing ovens. Wealthy households prepare breakfasts with honey, fruit, eggs, and warm bread. The rich discuss politics over generous tables. Children chase one another through courtyards. The city eats well enough to forget places like this exist. Inside, you count every bite, not because anyone tells you to, but because instinct whispers that making the meal last somehow makes the morning shorter. Time becomes strangely connected to food. When the bread is finished, you know many hours still remain before another meal appears. The guards understand this rhythm well. Their footsteps pass occasionally through the corridor, checking locks, watching quietly, moving on. Life inside the prison follows simple routines that rarely change. Predictability replaces freedom. As the light creeping through the small window slowly shifts across the floor, your stomach begins to settle, not because you are full, but because it has accepted today's portion. You brush away a few remaining crumbs, careful not to waste even the smallest piece. Somewhere nearby, another prisoner softly thanks the gods before eating. Elsewhere, someone says nothing at all. Different lives, different beliefs, the same bread, the same waiting. You lean back against the cool stone wall, clay cup resting beside you. The meal is over almost as soon as it began, yet it has revealed something important. Survival here is not measured by comfort, it is measured one loaf, one cup, one quiet morning at a time. And as the pale daylight continues its slow journey across the prison floor, your thoughts begin to drift toward another challenge that no amount of bread can truly ease: the coming night, and where, exactly, you will try to sleep. The last crumbs of bread have disappeared, the clay cup sits empty beside the wall, and little by little, the pale daylight begins its quiet retreat. You watch the thin ribbon of light climb slowly up the opposite wall before slipping away altogether. It is a small change, easy to overlook outside these walls, but here, it marks the passing of another day. The prison grows quieter as evening settles over Rome, somewhere beyond the thick stone. The city is preparing for night. Families gather around simple evening meals. Oil lamps glow behind the windows of crowded apartments. The last merchants pull wooden shutters across their shops. The laughter from distant taverns rises softly into the cooling air. Life continues, warm, familiar, comforting, yet none of it reaches you now. Only faint echoes survive the weight of the prison walls. A guard walks the corridor carrying a smoking torch. Its warm light stretches long shadows across the stone before disappearing around a corner. One by one, the sounds of movement fade. The prison has entered its own version of night. There is no announcement, no signal, only stillness. You look around your cell, searching for somewhere to rest. There is no bed waiting, no wooden frame, no woven mattress stuffed with wool or feathers. In the homes of prosperous Romans, even modest sleeping rooms often contained simple wooden beds raised above the floor. Thick blankets, woven linen, and stuffed cushions offered at least a little comfort after a long day's work. Here, the earth itself is your bed. The straw scattered across the floor is thin and uneven. Some of it is fresh enough to soften the stone slightly. Much of it has already begun to dry, crumble, and flatten beneath the weight of previous prisoners. You gather what you can into a small pile, not because it creates comfort, but because it creates the idea of comfort. Sometimes that is enough. You lower yourself carefully onto the stone. The cold surprises you. even after spending the day inside the cell. The floor seems to have stored the chill of countless winters. It presses gently through your clothing, into your shoulders, your back, your legs. The stone asks nothing of you. It simply remains what it has always been: hard, patient, unchanging. You turn onto one side, then the other. Neither feels right. The chains around your wrists settle awkwardly against the floor with a soft metallic whisper. Finding a position that allows both your body and your restraints to rest together becomes its own quiet puzzle. Many Roman prisoners likely experience the same struggle every evening. Not dramatic suffering, just endless discomfort, the sort that slowly steals rest 1 hour at a time. As darkness deepens, the prison becomes strangely alive. Sounds you never noticed during daylight begin to emerge. Water drips somewhere beyond the walls. A mouse rustles through loose straw before disappearing again. Wood creaks softly as old beams settle under their own weight. Farther away, someone shifts in their sleep. A quiet sigh follows. Then silence returns. Without sunlight, it becomes difficult to measure time. The narrow window above your head has disappeared into darkness. There are no clocks, no bells marking each passing hour, only your breathing, and the slow rhythm of the prison itself. The air grows cooler as night advances. Moisture gathers on the stone walls, leaving them damp beneath your fingertips. You pull your arms closer to your body, instinctively trying to preserve warmth. Winter nights could be especially harsh inside Roman prisons. Thick stone walls trapped cold air remarkably well, and without proper bedding or heating, many prisoners endured long hours of discomfort. Even during warmer seasons, underground cells often remain surprisingly cool after sunset. Sleep arrives reluctantly. You close your eyes. For a moment, you almost imagine your own home, perhaps a small courtyard where rainwater collected in a stone basin. Perhaps the scent of olive oil warming over a cooking fire, perhaps familiar voices speaking softly nearby. Memory becomes a blanket that reality cannot provide. Then, a sudden clink of iron somewhere in the corridor pulls you gently back. You are here, not there. The dream fades almost before it begins. Hours pass in fragments. You drift into light sleep, wake again, turn carefully, listen, wait. Some prisoners whisper quiet prayers into the darkness. Others simply stare upward, watching shadows that no longer exist. Everyone discovers their own way of passing the night. Outside, above these heavy walls, the stars continue their silent journey across the Roman sky. Moonlight touches marble temples. Silver light glides over quiet rooftops. Cool breezes move through gardens where sleeping families never think about the people hidden beneath their feet. The city rests peacefully. The prison merely endures. At last, a faint change appears high above. Not sunlight, not yet, only the softest hint of gray entering through the narrow opening in the wall. Morning is approaching. You have survived your first full night. Not comfortably, not peacefully, but you have endured it. As you slowly sit upright, your joints stiff from the unforgiving stone, you hear familiar footsteps echoing once more through the corridor. The guards are awake. And soon, you will meet the men whose daily lives unfold among these silent walls, the keepers of Rome's forgotten prisoners. The first light of morning is almost invisible, just a pale ribbon stretching across the highest stones of your cell. It does little to warm the air, yet somehow, it changes everything. The darkness no longer feels endless. The prison slowly begins to wake. A key turns somewhere down the corridor. Another answers farther away. Boots scrape across worn stone. A quiet cough echoes through the passage. Then, the familiar rhythm returns. The guards are making their rounds. Yesterday, they were simply figures guiding you from one place to another. Silent men in polished helmets, steady hands fastening chains, faces that revealed almost nothing. Today, you begin to notice them. Not as symbols of Rome's authority, but as ordinary people living lives that are strangely connected to your own. One guard pauses outside your door. He carries a small clay oil lamp instead of a torch. Its softer light fills the corridor with a warm golden glow. For a brief moment, your eyes meet. Neither of you speaks. He simply checks the iron lock, glances at your chains, and continues onward. His movements are practiced, almost effortless. He has repeated this routine hundreds, perhaps thousands, of times. It is easy to imagine Roman guards as harsh, unfeeling men whose only purpose was punishment. The reality was often more ordinary. Most were soldiers, or former soldiers, assigned to duties that required patience more than violence. Guarding prisoners was rarely considered a glorious assignment. There were no triumphal parades, no cheers from the crowds, only long hours spent inside damp stone corridors where every day resembled the one before it. Many likely preferred serving on distant frontiers beneath open skies rather than standing watch in places like this. Yet Rome depended upon routine. Every task, no matter how humble, helped preserve order across its vast empire. As another guard passes, you notice details that escaped you before. His leather sandals are worn smooth from countless patrols. Small scratches mark the bronze plates protecting his shoulders. His red cloak has faded slightly beneath years of sunlight and rain. Nothing about him suggests luxury. He serves the empire, but he lives much like countless ordinary Romans. Discipline shaped every part of his day. He rose before sunrise, checked his equipment, received instructions from superior officers, walked the same corridors, counted the same prisoners, locked the same doors each evening. Predictability governed his life almost as completely as yours, only the chains were different. One younger guard stops near a neighboring cell. From inside, an elderly prisoner quietly asks for more water. The guard listens. He hesitates, then nods before walking away. Several minutes later, he returns carrying another small clay cup. No words are exchanged. The prisoner accepts it with a grateful glance. Small moments like these rarely appear in ancient histories. Writers preferred stories of emperors, battles, and political intrigue, but daily life was built upon quieter encounters, simple acts of duty, brief moments of kindness, tiny choices that disappeared from history almost as soon as they happened. Of course, not every guard behaved with patience. Some prisons earned terrible reputations. Certain jailers accepted bribes. Others treated prisoners harshly, believing fear maintained better discipline than fairness ever could. Human nature has changed very little across the centuries. Where authority exists, character matters. Roman law expected guards to prevent escapes above all else. If a prisoner vanished through negligence, severe punishment could fall upon those responsible. Some guards faced fines. Others risked imprisonment themselves. In extreme cases, their own lives could be placed in jeopardy. Responsibility weighed heavily upon every key hanging from their belts. Perhaps that explains why their routine seems so careful. Every lock checked twice, every chain examined, every prisoner counted. Not because they distrusted everyone equally, but because Rome demanded certainty. As the morning continues, you hear fragments of quiet conversation drifting between two guards stationed farther down the corridor. They speak about the weather, about bread prices in the market, about a child learning to walk at home. Ordinary conversations, unexpectedly comforting. For a moment, the prison feels less like a place divided between captives and keepers. It feels like a place filled with people, each carrying burdens invisible to the others. One wears chains, another wears armor. Both are bound by duties they did not entirely choose. The older guard from earlier returns during the afternoon inspection. This time, he pauses slightly longer. his eyes briefly study the scratches covering the ancient wall behind you. Perhaps he has seen hundreds of prisoners staring at those same marks. Perhaps he no longer notices them at all. Without speaking, he adjusts the position of your water cup so it rests farther from the damp corner of the room, a small gesture. Almost meaningless, yet somehow it reminds you that even inside a prison, people remain capable of ordinary consideration. The lamp in the corridor burns lower as daylight begins to fade once more. Soon the evening rounds will begin. The doors will remain locked. The silence will return. But today has changed something. Yesterday, the guards seemed like distant figures wrapped in iron and authority. Now, they have become part of the quiet rhythm of prison life, familiar footsteps, familiar faces, people whose own stories remain hidden behind helmets and duty. The guards' footsteps gradually disappear into the distance. Their oil lamps leave behind only faint ribbons of light beneath the doors. Once again, the prison belongs to its prisoners. For a while, nothing seems to happen. You lean against the cool stone wall, listening to the familiar sounds that have already become part of your world. The slow drip of water, the quiet rustle of straw, the distant clink of iron. Then, a voice, soft enough that you almost mistake it for your imagination. You are new. The words drift from somewhere beyond the darkness, calm, neither friendly nor threatening, simply curious. You hesitate before answering. Yes, silence follows. Then comes a quiet chuckle. I remember my first day. You cannot see the speaker clearly, only the faint outline of a figure sitting against the opposite wall, where the last traces of evening light fail to reach. Until now, imprisonment has felt strangely lonely. But loneliness, you begin to realize, is rarely the same as being alone. Roman prisons were seldom designed with privacy in mind. Cells often held several prisoners at once, especially in the larger cities where arrests were common. Space was limited, and comfort mattered very little to those responsible for maintaining order. The people around you came from remarkably different walks of life. From the outside, they all appeared to be prisoners inside these walls. Each carried an entirely different story. The man nearest the doorway introduces himself quietly. He had once worked along the river docks, unloading grain from ships arriving from distant provinces. One missing shipment, one accusation of theft, and now he waits for officials to decide whether anyone truly believes his innocence. Across the room sits another prisoner whose clothing, though worn, still hints at better days. He speaks carefully, his words are measured. You learn that he borrowed money to expand his family's vineyard after several successful harvests. Then came a season of drought. The vines withered, the debts remained. Misfortune had brought him here just as surely as any crime. Not everyone inside the prison had stolen, not everyone had fought. Some had simply lost against circumstances beyond their control. Near the far wall rests an older man whose back remains unusually straight despite the years. His short gray hair and weathered face suggest decades of military service. Once, he marched beneath Rome's standards across distant frontiers. Now, he waits in chains after disobeying the orders of a superior officer. Whether his decision had been brave or foolish, only history could judge. The prison rarely asked. In another corner sits a young man who speaks very little. The others lower their voices whenever they mention him. Eventually, someone explains why. He had criticized a powerful official during a public gathering. Perhaps he had spoken too boldly. Perhaps someone misunderstood his words. Perhaps someone simply wished to silence him. Political accusations in Rome could become dangerous, especially during uncertain times when loyalty mattered as much as truth. He spends much of each day staring toward the tiny window high above the wall, as though the sliver of sky still belongs to him. Then there are those whose Names no one knows, foreign travelers, sailors from distant ports, merchants passing through unfamiliar towns, people who speak with accents from provinces scattered across the vast empire. Some struggle to understand the conversations around them, others simply wait in silence, uncertain what tomorrow will bring. The prison gathers lives from every corner of Rome's enormous world. For the first time since your arrival, you begin to understand something unexpected. These walls do not separate only the guilty from the innocent, they gather together. Fortune, misfortune, wisdom, regret, hope, and fear. One evening, the older soldier quietly shares a story about marching through snow-covered mountains far beyond Italy. The dock worker listens with genuine fascination. The vineyard owner smiles faintly, imagining places he has never seen. For a few peaceful moments, the prison almost disappears. The walls remain, the chains remain, but conversation travels farther than iron ever can. Ancient prisons were harsh places, yet human beings carried with them the oldest comfort of all: stories, a memory of childhood, a description of a distant village, a favorite meal prepared long ago. Such simple conversations could briefly transform a prison cell into something almost resembling ordinary life. Not because conditions improved, but because people remembered they were more than their accusations. As darkness settles over the prison once again, the voices gradually fade. One by one, your companions drift into uneasy sleep. The soldier rests against the wall. The dock worker quietly wraps his arms around his knees. The young political prisoner continues gazing upward until even the narrow window disappears into darkness. You realize that tomorrow may judge each of them differently. One could be released, another fined, another enslaved, another condemned. None of them knows, neither do you. The uncertainty is shared more equally than the chains themselves. You close your eyes, surrounded now not by strangers, but by lives temporarily crossing your own. Beyond these walls, Rome continues to celebrate its victories and build its monuments. Inside, history waits in silence, and somewhere beyond the prison corridors, officials are already preparing for another day of decisions. Soon, your own first week behind these walls will begin. The days begin to blend together, not because they are identical, but because the prison has its own quiet rhythm, one that slowly replaces the rhythm of the world outside. Morning arrives with the turning of keys, a simple meal follows, the guards make their rounds, light drifts across the stone floor, darkness returns, then it all begins again. When you first entered these walls, every sound startled you, every shadow seemed unfamiliar. Every passing hour felt impossibly long. Now, after nearly a week, something unexpected has begun to happen. You no longer jump when the iron lock clicks. You recognize which guard walks with a slight limp. You can tell the time of day simply by the angle of light falling through the narrow window high above your head. The prison has not become kinder, you have simply begun to understand it. Human beings possess a remarkable ability to adapt, even to places they never imagined surviving. The cold stone still greets you each morning, the chains still limit every movement, the meals remain plain, yet your body has quietly learned how to conserve its strength. You rise more slowly, you waste fewer steps. You discover that sitting against one particular corner of the wall eases the ache in your back. These are not comforts, they are small victories, the sort that matter only when almost everything else has been taken away. Your hands have changed, the skin beneath the iron restraints has grown rougher. At first, every movement caused the metal to rub painfully against your wrists. Now, faint calluses have begun to form, your shoulders no longer ache quite as fiercely after a night on the stone floor. Even your footsteps have become shorter, matching the quiet rhythm of your chains without conscious thought. It is a strange realization. The prison is changing you. Not all changes happen where they can be seen. The greater struggle unfolds inside your thoughts. During the first days, your mind remained fixed on the moment of your arrest. You replayed every conversation, every decision, every face in the crowd, searching for the single moment when everything changed. But memory grows tired. Questions without answers slowly lose their sharpness. Instead, new thoughts take their place. You begin wondering what is happening beyond these walls. Has your family heard where you are? Does your workshop still stand open? Has someone else taken over your daily tasks? Or has the world quietly continued without noticing your absence? Ancient Roman prisoners faced this uncertainty every day. Without newspapers, letters delivered instantly, or reliable communication, information traveled slowly. Some prisoners waited weeks before hearing news from home. Others heard nothing at all. Silence could become its own kind of burden. Around you, the other prisoners have settled into their own routines. The former dock worker carefully stretches his stiff shoulders every morning before sitting down again. The elderly soldier quietly sharpens his memory instead of a sword, retelling stories of distant campaigns with astonishing detail. The vineyard owner counts imaginary rows of grapevines beneath his breath, as though walking once more through fields that may already belong to someone else. Even the young political prisoner has changed. He still speaks very little. But now, sometimes, he watches the tiny patch of sky above the window with something that almost resembles peace rather than despair. Perhaps hope changes shape when it cannot disappear entirely. One afternoon, rain begins to fall outside. You cannot see the clouds, only hear them. Soft drops strike the roof above. Water trickles slowly through unseen channels built by Roman engineers long before your arrival. The cool scent of wet earth drifts faintly into the prison. For a few quiet moments, everyone stops what they're doing, listening. Rain, such an ordinary sound. Yet inside these walls, it feels almost like a visitor from another world. The guards continue their duties as always. Locks are checked, meals are delivered, names are counted. Routine never pauses for changing weather. Perhaps that is why Rome endured for so many centuries. Its greatest strength was often not spectacular victories, but endless repetition. Orders followed, rules maintained, responsibilities fulfilled. Even here, as the seventh evening approaches, you realize something almost impossible. The prison no longer feels unfamiliar. It has become painfully familiar. You know where. Every crack runs through the wall. You recognize the loose stone near the doorway. You can identify each prisoner's footsteps before they speak. This knowledge brings no happiness, only acceptance. Acceptance is quieter than hope, but stronger than fear. When night finally settles once again, you lower yourself onto the thin straw with practiced care. Your body remembers the movement before your thoughts do. The stone is still cold, the air is still damp, yet you fall asleep a little sooner than you did on your first night, not because life has improved, but because exhaustion has become an old companion. Somewhere beyond these walls, magistrates continue hearing disputes, witnesses prepare their testimonies, clerks record names upon wax tablets. Rome's machinery of justice never truly rests, and before long, your own name may be called. Because waiting cannot last forever, soon you will stand before the law itself. Morning arrives with quiet certainty, the familiar turning of keys, the slow footsteps of the guards, the pale light slipping through the narrow opening high above your cell. Another day begins, yet this morning feels different. The conversations around you are softer than usual. The elderly soldier has stopped telling stories. The dock worker stares silently at the floor. Even the guard seems slightly more formal as they move through the corridor. No one needs to explain why. Everyone here knows that waiting cannot last forever. Sooner or later, Every prisoner must leave this cell, not always for freedom, but always for judgment. You cannot help wondering what awaits beyond these walls. Will someone listen to your side of the story? Will witnesses remember the truth? Or has your fate already begun taking shape long before anyone hears your name? In ancient Rome, the law was one of the foundations upon which the empire proudly stood. Romans believed that order separated civilization from chaos. Roads, aqueducts, markets, armies, all depended upon rules that people were expected to obey. Justice was not simply an idea, it was a visible part of everyday life. Magistrates sat in public places where citizens could watch disputes unfold. Contracts were written carefully upon wax tablets. Witnesses were called to speak before officials. Laws were copied, studied, and passed from one generation to the next. To many Romans, this system represented the greatness of their civilization, yet justice was rarely identical for everyone. Status mattered, wealth mattered, citizenship mattered. A respected senator often possessed opportunities unavailable to an ordinary laborer. A wealthy merchant could hire skilled advocates to argue his case. A poor worker might rely only upon his own words. Foreigners sometimes struggled even more. Unfamiliar with local customs or legal traditions, the law existed for all. Its experience differed greatly. Inside your cell, the vineyard owner quietly explains that he once attended legal hearings in the forum. According to him, some disputes ended peacefully after careful discussion. Others lasted for days as witnesses argued over details that seemed impossible to untangle. Roman courts could be surprisingly methodical. Evidence mattered, testimony mattered, reputation mattered too. People known for honesty often carried greater weight than strangers whose names few recognized. You begin to understand why prisoners spent so much time waiting. Justice moved carefully, at least it tried. 2. Not every accusation involved terrible crimes. Some concerned unpaid debts, others involved disagreements over land, property, inheritance, or broken business agreements. The Roman legal system reached deeply into ordinary life. A boundary stone moved a few feet, a disputed contract, an unpaid tax. Even such quiet disagreements could eventually bring someone before a magistrate. More serious crimes carried heavier consequences: theft, violence, forgery, bribery, desertion from the army, rebellion against Roman authority. Each offense belonged to its own place within the complicated world of Roman law. Punishments varied accordingly. Many people imagine Roman justice as constant cruelty. The truth was more complicated. Fines were common, property could be confiscated, some offenders were publicly beaten, others were sentenced to forced labor. Exile remained another frequent punishment. Being ordered to leave Rome and never return could feel almost as painful as imprisonment itself. For certain crimes, the penalties became far more severe, but those stories belong to another chapter. As the afternoon light slowly crosses your cell floor, the young political prisoner finally speaks. "My father always said the law protects everyone." He pauses, then quietly adds, "I wonder if he still believes that." No one answers, not because anyone disagrees, but because every person inside this room has begun asking similar questions. Justice can appear very different depending upon which side of the courtroom you occupy. The guards continue their rounds with quiet professionalism. To them, guilt has not yet been decided. Their task is not to judge, only to ensure that each prisoner remains where the law expects them to be. There is something strangely reassuring about that distinction. Even inside these walls, not everyone decides your fate. As evening approaches, distant sounds drift faintly through the prison: voices, footsteps, the movement of officials somewhere beyond the corridors. Perhaps another hearing has just ended. Perhaps another prisoner has received judgment. Life inside the prison continues much as before, yet now every passing sound carries new meaning. You picture the forum bustling beneath the afternoon sun. Magistrates seated upon carved chairs, clerks scratching notes onto wax tablets, witnesses raising their hands to speak, citizens gathering quietly to watch justice unfold before their eyes, somewhere beyond those crowds. Your own name waits upon a list, not forgotten, simply waiting for its turn. Night settles once more over the prison. The familiar darkness returns. You lie carefully upon the thin straw, your body moving almost automatically after so many evenings on the cold stone floor. Sleep comes slowly, not because of discomfort, but because your thoughts have wandered beyond these walls, beyond the guards, beyond the prison itself. Toward a courtroom you have not yet seen, toward voices you have not yet heard, toward a decision that may shape the rest of your life. And as the prison grows silent around you, one question remains: what if someone refused to wait for that judgment? What if they tried to escape? Night settles quietly over the prison. The last footsteps of the guards fade into distant corridors, and once again, darkness wraps itself around the ancient stone. You lie awake, not because the floor is colder than usual, or because your chains have become heavier. Instead, your thoughts have wandered somewhere they have never dared to go before. What if you simply left? The question arrives so naturally that it almost surprises you. Not as a reckless dream, but as quiet curiosity. Every prisoner, sooner or later, must have asked the same thing. You picture the streets beyond these walls, the cool evening air, the familiar rooftops of Rome, the freedom to choose your own direction. It feels so close, yet impossibly distant. You open your eyes and slowly study the room around you. For the first time, you are not looking for comfort, you are looking for possibilities. The tiny window sits far above your reach. Even standing on the highest pile of straw would leave it many feet overhead. Its opening is barely wide enough to admit fresh air, certainly not a person. The walls surrounding you are massive blocks of volcanic stone, fitted together with remarkable precision. Some have stood here for generations, surviving storms, earthquakes, and the passing of countless rulers. They were never designed to be taken apart from the inside. The heavy wooden door appears equally uninviting. Thick oak planks are reinforced by wide bands of iron. The hinges sit outside the cell, beyond your reach. The lock itself is protected within the corridor, where only the guards carry the proper keys. You begin to understand that every part of the prison has been designed with one simple purpose: not comfort, not punishment, containment. Ancient Roman engineers were practical people. Whether building roads, aqueducts, military forts, or prisons, they valued strength, durability, and efficiency. Their buildings were meant to last, and prison architecture reflected that same philosophy. Every narrow corridor limited movement, every heavy doorway created another barrier. Corners were designed to eliminate hidden spaces where prisoners might gather unnoticed. Even the smallest details served a purpose. The guards, too, formed part of the prison's design. Their routines rarely changed: morning inspections, meal deliveries, evening counts, night patrols. Predictability allowed them to notice anything unusual: a missing chain, a damaged lock, an unfamiliar sound. Routine itself became another wall. The elderly soldier notices you studying the window. A faint smile crosses his weathered face. "I wondered the same thing once," he says. Quietly, "You tried?" He gives a slow shake of his head. "No." Another pause. "I realized the walls were more patient than I was." His answer lingers in your thoughts. The walls did not need to hurry. Eventually, every prisoner would face judgment. Escape demanded time. the prison offered very little of it. Some prisoners undoubtedly attempted to flee throughout Rome's long history. Human hope has always searched for impossible paths, a loose stone, an unlocked door, a distracted guard, yet successful escapes were likely uncommon, especially from heavily guarded prisons in the heart of the city. Failure carried terrible consequences. A prisoner caught attempting escape could expect harsher treatment than before, additional restraints, closer supervision, possibly even a more severe sentence when judgment finally arrived. Nor did the risks end there. Roman guards bore tremendous responsibility for those placed in their care. If a prisoner escaped through negligence, the guards themselves could face severe punishment. Knowing this, they rarely allowed complacency to settle into their routines. Every evening, one guard walks slowly past your door carrying a small oil lamp. Its gentle flame dances across the stone walls. He pauses, checks the lock, gives the iron bars a firm pull. Listens, only then does he continue onward. The inspection lasts no more than a few seconds, yet it happens every single night. Consistency protects the prison more effectively than constant force ever could. You begin noticing other details as well. The corridor outside bends sharply every few steps. No prisoner could see very far even if a door somehow stood open. The ceilings remain low enough to discourage climbing. Drainage channels carry rainwater away without creating tunnels large enough to crawl through. Every feature quietly limits possibility. Outside these walls, Rome itself provides another obstacle. Even if someone somehow escaped the prison, where would they go? The city is enormous, crowded, filled with soldiers, officials, merchants, neighbors, and countless eyes. A prisoner still wearing chains would attract attention almost immediately. Removing them required tools and time, two things difficult to find while fleeing through the busiest city in the empire. The dream of escape slowly begins to fade, not because freedom has become less beautiful, but because reality has become impossible to ignore. Sometimes the strongest prison is not built from stone, it is built from certainty, the certainty that every path outward has already been considered by someone long before you arrived, the certainty that countless others have searched these same walls for weakness and found none. As midnight passes quietly overhead, you stop studying the door, the window, the walls. Instead, you lean back against the cool stone and close your eyes. Tomorrow will come, just as it always does. The guards will unlock doors, bread will arrive, the prison will continue its patient rhythm, and somewhere beyond these carefully constructed walls, one building holds even greater importance than this one. A prison keeps you waiting, but another place decides your future. Soon, you will come to know the most famous prison in all of ancient Rome. The waiting does not feel endless anymore, because the prison itself has begun to change shape in your thoughts, not the one you are in now, but another place, a name whispered among guards and officials, a place older than memory, the Mamertine prison. Even before anyone speaks it aloud, you feel its weight, like a shadow cast across Rome's history. One afternoon, while guards make their routine inspection, you hear them talking in low voices beyond your cell. Not about meals, not about weather, but about a place beneath the city itself, a prison carved deep into stone, where time itself seems to slow down. The Mamertine prison lies near the Roman Forum, close to the heart of political power. Unlike the prison you know now, it was not designed with even the smallest consideration for comfort or light. It was built downward, into darkness, into cold, into silence that feels almost physical. As the story is described, your imagination begins to form it piece by piece, a narrow entrance above ground, leading down a steep staircase of ancient stone, each step removing you further from the world above. The air growing heavier with every descent, cool, still, almost suffocating in its quietness. The lower chamber, known in later times as the Tullianum, was carved directly into bedrock. There were no windows, no gentle beams of light, only stone pressed against stone. As though the earth itself had swallowed the space whole, water sometimes seeped through the walls, not enough to refresh, only enough to remind those inside that the world above still existed. Ancient Romans used this place for prisoners considered especially dangerous or politically important. Generals captured in war, rebels, conspirators, enemies of the state, people whose stories were too significant to end quickly and too dangerous to ignore. You listen carefully as the guards continue their conversation. They speak of chains heavier than those you wear, of iron rings fixed permanently into stone walls, of prisoners who never saw daylight again after crossing that threshold. Whether every detail is true or exaggerated by time, it hardly matters. What matters is the feeling it leaves behind, a place designed not for waiting, but for forgetting. The idea settles quietly in your mind. Even inside a prison, there are levels of distance from freedom. Some cells still allow light, some allow sound, some allow conversation, and then there are places like that, where even voices seem to hesitate before entering. The dock worker notices your expression. You've heard of it. He says quietly, you nod. He exhales slowly. They say even guards walk differently when they pass near it. No one adds anything after that, because some places do not require explanation, only silence. As the afternoon light slowly moves across your cell floor, the thought of the Mamertine prison remains with you, not as fear alone, but as perspective. Your own cell, once felt unbearable, now feels like a place suspended somewhere between punishment and waiting, a space where time still moves, where breath still feels normal, where night still ends in morning. Outside these walls, Rome continues its endless rhythm, but beneath the Forum, there is another world, one that feels almost disconnected from the rest of the empire. The guards complete their rounds as usual. Keys turn, doors close, chains settle, yet something about the air feels different now, as if even they, in their routine, are aware of places deeper than this one. That night, sleep comes slowly, not because of discomfort, but because your mind has begun to imagine stairs leading downward, deeper and deeper still, until light itself becomes uncertain. And as your eyes finally close, you realize that imprisonment is not one place, it is many, stacked beneath Rome like layers of forgotten time, and somewhere below all of them, the silence waits that even words cannot reach. The prison no longer feels like a place you entered, it feels like a place you have always existed within, not because time has stopped, but because it has softened. Edges of days blur together in a quiet rhythm of routine, the turning of keys, the passing of food through iron doors, the slow walk of guards through damp corridors, and the long silences in between. Somewhere beyond these walls, Rome continues to speak your name in rooms you cannot enter, not loudly, not urgently, but in the careful language of law, in records written on wax, in conversations held behind columns in the Forum. Your trial is approaching, not as a sudden event, but as something slowly forming. Like weather gathering over distant hills, inside your cell, nothing announces this change, and yet everyone feels it. The dock worker has stopped humming entirely. The merchant no longer counts invisible coins in his hands. Even the elderly soldier seems quieter, as though conserving words for a battle that is no longer his. Waiting for trial in ancient Rome was not a simple delay, it was a state of suspension. A life placed between accusation and conclusion. Some prisoners remained in this condition for only a short time, especially when evidence was clear or officials were readily available. Others waited far longer than they ever expected, Especially when witnesses were distant, or when politics complicated the truth. Rome was vast, and its justice system moved through that vastness with careful steps, not slow out of laziness, but slow out of structure. Evidence had to be gathered, testimonies confirmed, officials summoned, records reviewed, and sometimes the emperor himself became the final voice. You begin to understand why patience is not just required here. It is demanded. One afternoon, the light entering your cell shifts slightly warmer than usual, dust floats through it like quiet snow. The young political prisoner finally speaks again, not to anyone in particular, but as if thinking aloud. How does a city decide what is true? No one answers immediately, because the question is too large for the room. The soldier eventually replies, "Rome doesn't decide what is true," he says slowly, "it decides what can be proven." That distinction settles heavily in the air. Truth and proof are not always the same thing, and inside these walls, only one of them carries weight. You begin to notice how even small details have become meaningful. A guard pausing slightly longer outside a door, a second set of footsteps joining the first, a name spoken more than once during counting. Each moment feels like a fragment of something larger forming just beyond perception, yet still out of reach. At night, conversations soften into whispers, not out of fear, but out of reflection. People begin speaking less about what they lost, and more about what they might say if given the chance. The merchant speaks of his family again, but differently now, not with regret, but with careful memory, as if trying to preserve them inside his thoughts. The dock worker describes the river at sunrise, insisting the water always looked brighter before the city fully awakened. Even the soldier admits he sometimes misses the discipline of marching, not the war itself, but the certainty of movement. These are not stories of escape, they are stories of continuity, things that still belong to them. Even here, outside, Rome prepares for another cycle of judgment. Inside, you begin to understand something subtle. The trial is not only about guilt or innocence, it is about narrative. Which version of events will survive when spoken aloud? Which details will be remembered? Which will fade as evening arrives? The prison feels neither heavier nor lighter, just more aware of itself. Every sound becomes part of anticipation. Every silence becomes part of expectation. You lie down on the straw, but sleep does not come quickly, not because of fear, but because your mind has begun rehearsing words you have not yet spoken, in another place, under higher ceilings and brighter light. Your story is already being prepared, and soon you will be asked to speak it. The night before a trial always feels different, even when nothing in the prison has physically changed. The doors still close with the same iron sound. The guards still walk their familiar routes. The straw beneath you is still thin and uneven, yet something in the air shifts quietly. Expectation becomes heavier than chains. You can feel it in the silence between conversations, in the way people stop speaking a little earlier than usual, in the way footsteps pause just a moment longer outside the cell doors. Somewhere in Rome, your name is being prepared for judgment, not as a mystery anymore, but as a decision waiting to be spoken aloud. In ancient Rome, not every prisoner left prison in the same way. Freedom was only one of several possible outcomes. Fines could be imposed, property could be taken, exile could remove a person from the city entirely, but there was another path, one that many prisoners feared more than confinement itself: slavery. The idea may sound distant today, but in the Roman world, slavery was deeply woven into society. It was not reserved only for prisoners of war, though war was one of its main sources. It also included debtors, criminals, and those judged to have committed serious offenses against Roman order. Inside your cell, the older soldier speaks quietly about it, not as theory, but as memory. He explains that in some cases, a convicted person's life was not ended, but reassigned. They could be transferred into forced labor under state authority, or sold into private ownership depending on the nature of their sentence and status. To many Romans, this was not always seen as random cruelty. It was considered a form of penalty that preserved usefulness. A life continued, but no longer belonging to oneself. The dock worker listens without interrupting. The merchant keeps his eyes on the floor. Even the political prisoner remains unusually still. No one needs to ask what that would feel like. The imagination fills in the silence easily enough. You begin to think about identity, about what remains of a person when choice is removed. In Roman thinking, status was never fixed for everyone in the same way. A free citizen held legal rights that shaped every aspect of life. But once those rights were lost, even temporarily, everything shifted. A name alone was no longer enough to define a person. What they became depended on who held authority over them. Outside the prison, Rome functioned through layers of labor. Slaves worked in households, workshops, mines, farms, and public buildings. Some performed exhausting physical work. Others managed accounts, educated children, or served in administrative roles depending on their skills. It was a system both complex and deeply unequal. Inside the prison, however, slavery represented something more immediate, a sentence that removed uncertainty, but replaced it with permanence. The young political prisoner finally speaks again. If they send us there, he says quietly, do we remain the same people? No one answers immediately, because the question does not have a simple direction. The soldier eventually responds, almost gently, people change long before their titles do. The words linger longer than expected. As the afternoon light shifts across the cell, you notice how differently each prisoner responds to the idea. The merchant seems to calculate silently, as if weighing loss against survival. The dock worker stares at his hands, perhaps imagining endless labor beyond these walls. The soldier looks upward, not in hope, but in understanding, and you realize something subtle. Fear is not equal among them. It depends on what each person values most. As evening approaches, the prison becomes quieter than usual, not because anything has changed outside, but because inside, everyone is thinking further ahead than tomorrow. Guards pass through their routine as always. Locks are checked, doors secured, names recorded. But even they seem slightly more deliberate in their movements, as if aware that certain days carry more weight than others. You lie down later than usual, not because sleep is difficult, but because imagining the future makes the present feel temporarily suspended. Somewhere beyond the stone walls, decisions are being prepared, not just about guilt, but about what kind of future will follow it, and soon, you will learn whether your life continues as your own, or becomes something else entirely. Night does not arrive suddenly inside the prison. It arrives slowly, like a curtain being drawn inch by inch across the world. First, the light outside begins to fade from pale gold into soft gray. Then the corridor lamps are lit one by one. Their glow trembles gently against the stone walls, and soon, the prison begins to sound different, not louder, but closer. You notice it in ways you never did before. The distant turn of keys. A chain dragged carefully along the floor. The soft closing of a heavy door somewhere far down the corridor. Even silence here has texture. It is never empty, only layered. Inside your cell, the day's conversations have already faded. Each prisoner has returned to their own thoughts. Some lie down early. Others remain seated for hours, staring at nothing in particular. The elderly soldier sometimes hums quietly to himself, though never loud enough for anyone to truly follow the tune. The dock worker stretches his arms slowly, as if trying to remind his body that it still belongs to him. The merchant counts breaths instead of coins now. And the young political prisoner listens more than he speaks, as though the prison itself is a language he is trying to understand. As darkness deepens, the sounds become more noticeable. Water moves somewhere within the stone structure, not in rushing streams, but in patient drops. One, then another, falling into unseen channels carved long before any of you arrived. Roman prisons were often built with practical engineering in mind. Drainage systems, ventilation passages, and reinforced foundations were designed to ensure the structure remained functional over time. Even in confinement, the empire's sense of order remained present in hidden ways, but none of that removes the feeling of isolation. Sound becomes the only connection to what lies beyond sight. A guard walking slowly past your door pauses. You hear the faint rustle of his clothing, the soft exhale of breath, then the scrape of iron as he checks the lock. It is a small ritual, reassuring in its repetition. Even prisoners begin to recognize individual guards by their footsteps alone. One walks with a steady, measured rhythm, another drags his heel slightly on the stone, another pauses briefly at each cell, as though counting not just doors, but lives. Outside, the city of Rome continues its endless rhythm. Somewhere beyond these walls, people are laughing in warm rooms, eating evening meals, speaking freely without thought of chains or locks. Yet here, those distant sounds never reach clearly, only fragments survive the distance. The muffled echo of celebration, the faint bark of a dog in a nearby street, the wind passing over rooftops. Inside the prison, these fragments become reminders, not of what is happening, but of what is unreachable. As the night grows deeper, you begin to notice something else. The prison is never fully silent, even when no one speaks, even when guards are not passing. The building itself seems to breathe. Old wood creaks as it settles, stone contracts slightly in the cool air, metal shifts against metal as chains rest. These sounds are not threatening, but they are constant, and constancy becomes its own form of presence. Sleep arrives in pieces, not all at once, a few moments of drifting thoughts, a brief sense of weightlessness, then awareness returns again with a distant sound in the corridor. You stop trying to fight it. Instead, you begin to exist alongside it. The prison does not allow escape from sound, only acceptance of it. Somewhere deeper in the corridor, a guard speaks quietly to another. Their voices are too low to understand, only tone remains, routine, familiar, unhurried. Eventually, even those sounds fade, leaving only the smallest details behind: breathing, occasional movement, the distant drip of water, and your own thoughts, no longer trying to escape the night, but moving with it. In a strange way, the prison has taught you to listen differently, not for comfort, but for continuity, because in a place where everything feels controlled, sound is one of the few things that still feels alive. And as you close your eyes once more, you realize that even silence in ancient Rome is never truly silent, it is simply waiting to be heard. Somewhere in the distance, a door opens, then closes again. The sound is ordinary, but inside the prison, even ordinary sounds carry meaning. It is early morning, the light entering your cell is still soft, almost hesitant, as though the sun itself is unsure about reaching this place. Guards move more actively today, not hurried, but purposeful. There is a different rhythm in their steps, you notice it immediately. Something is about to happen that does not belong to the usual routine of chains and silence. A name is called somewhere down the corridor. Then another. A prisoner stands. Chains clink as he is led away. No explanation follows, only the fading sound of footsteps. Inside Roman prisons, not every day was the same. Some moments were for punishment, others for waiting, and occasionally, for something closer to mercy, family visits were not guaranteed, but they were possible, especially for those whose relatives still had influence, resources, or simply the determination to come. The idea of seeing someone from the outside world again becomes difficult to describe, not because it restores freedom, but because it briefly reminds a prisoner that they are still part of a life beyond these walls. The dock worker is the first to speak. Sometimes they allow visitors, he says quietly. His voice is careful, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the possibility itself. The merchant looks up. You think someone would come? He asks. The question is not directed at anyone in particular. It floats in the air like something fragile. Even hope, here, feels like it might break easily. The elderly soldier remains silent for a long time. Then he finally speaks. My son came once, he says. No one interrupts. He stood on the other side of a gate like this. He continues, I remember thinking I should say something strong, something worthy. He pauses, but I only asked if he was eating enough. A quiet stillness follows, because everyone understands that moment, the desire to speak with dignity, and the reality of what truly matters when time is limited. In some cases, families brought food, clothing, or small comforts. In others, they brought messages from the outside world, news of homes, businesses, or changing political conditions in Rome. For prisoners who had not yet been sentenced, these visits could even influence outcomes, a word from a respected citizen, a payment made quietly to the right official, a plea delivered at the right moment. Mercy in ancient Rome was never entirely separate from influence, but not every prisoner received visitors. Some had been forgotten, others had been deliberately left behind, and for many, no one remained who even knew where they were. As the morning continues, you hear another movement in the corridor. This time, it is not a prisoner being taken away. It is a brief pause outside a cell, a softer exchange of voices, then the faint sound of something being passed through iron bars, a loaf of bread, a small bundle of cloth, perhaps a letter. The contents remain unseen, but the change in the prisoner's posture is immediate. Hope, when it arrives, does not announce itself loudly, it simply alters how a person stands. Later, the political prisoner speaks quietly. If someone came for you, he says, what would you want them to say? The question lingers. No one answers right away, because it is not simple. What do you say to someone outside when your life has been reduced to waiting? The dock worker finally responds, that I am still here. The soldier nods slowly, that I did not disappear. Even that feels like enough. The prison does not remove hope entirely, it changes its shape. Hope becomes smaller, more precise, a visit, a word, a name spoken aloud in the right place, a moment of recognition. As the day continues, you begin to notice how differently time feels when something might happen. Hours no longer feel entirely empty, they feel suspended, as though something could interrupt them at any moment. A door could open, a guard could speak your name, a message from outside could arrive, or it might not. That uncertainty itself becomes its own form of waiting. By evening, the light fades once again through the narrow window. The prison settles into its familiar rhythm, but something remains different now, a subtle shift in atmosphere, as if everyone is listening more carefully than before, not for sounds of punishment, but for signs of return. You lie down on the straw later than usual. Your thoughts are not only on the prison anymore, they drift outward, toward faces you may not have seen in weeks, or months, or perhaps longer, and for the first time in a long while. You allow yourself to imagine that somewhere beyond these walls, someone might still remember your name. The prison feels quieter today, not because anything has changed in the structure of stone and iron, but because certain conversations have stopped entirely. Some topics, once spoken, seem to leave a heavier silence behind them. You notice it in the way prisoners avoid each other's eyes, in the way even the guards speak a little less than usual. It begins with a sound in the corridor, not the usual rhythm of footsteps, but something slower, more deliberate, a key turning, followed by the faint scrape of a door that has not been opened in a long time. A prisoner is taken out, no one is told where, and no one asks aloud. In ancient Rome, imprisonment was only one part of a much wider system of punishment. It was often temporary, a holding space before something else was decided, and sometimes, what came next was far more final. Inside your cell, the elderly soldier breaks the silence first. "There are worse outcomes than this," he says quietly. No one responds immediately, because everyone understands what he means. Roman justice could take many forms depending on the crime, the status of the accused, and the political climate of the time. Some punishments were public, designed not only to punish, but to be witnessed, to remind the living of order. Fines and confiscations were the most common. Property, land, or wealth could be taken away. For many citizens, this alone was devastating enough to reshape an entire life. Exile was another path. A person could be ordered to leave Rome or a province entirely, to lose their home, their community, their identity tied to place, and to survive somewhere unfamiliar, often without support or protection. But for certain crimes, especially those seen as threats to Roman authority, punishments became far more severe. The Roman world did not treat all offenses equally. Rebellion, high treason, certain forms of political conspiracy, and extreme acts of violence against the state or its leaders, these were viewed not just as crimes, but as disruptions to the entire structure of order itself. The soldier speaks again, more quietly this time. "I saw punishment once," he says. No one interrupts, outside the city. His gaze drifts slightly, as if looking at something far beyond the walls. It was meant to be remembered. He does not continue, and he does not need to. In Rome, punishment was sometimes designed to extend beyond the moment itself, to remain in memory, to become warning, to exist in stories told long after the event had passed. Even the idea of execution carried a public weight in certain cases, not a spectacle for pleasure alone, but as a demonstration of authority, of consequence, of boundaries that could not be crossed. Yet inside the prison, such thoughts arrive differently, not as distant history, but as possibilities that might soon become personal. The dock worker clears his throat. "Do they always decide here?" he asks. The question is simple, but it carries everything beneath it. The answer is not immediate, because the truth is complicated. Some decisions were made by magistrates, others required higher approval, some were influenced by witnesses, others by reputation, and in certain cases, by power far beyond the prison walls. The merchant finally speaks, so we wait for someone else to decide what we become. No one disagrees, because that is exactly what it feels like. The young political prisoner stares at the floor for a long time, then quietly says, "Maybe that is the punishment too." The room does not respond, but something shifts in understanding. Punishment is not always a single moment. Sometimes it is the waiting, the uncertainty, the inability to change what is coming, even as you feel it approaching. Outside, Rome continues its daily rhythm. Markets open, legal cases proceed, soldiers march. Life, in its ordinary form, does not pause for judgment. Inside, however, time feels differently shaped. As evening arrives, the guards make their rounds with their usual precision, but their faces seem more distant than before, as if even they are aware that certain doors lead not back to cells, but beyond them entirely. You lie down slowly that night. The straw beneath you is the same as always. The stone is just as cold, yet your thoughts do not remain in the cell anymore. They drift toward something larger, a system, a city, a decision yet to be spoken, and somewhere in that silence, you begin to understand something unsettling. Imprisonment is not the final punishment in Rome. It is only the space before it. The prison in your mind has begun to feel less like imagination, and more like something real enough to survive time itself, not because you have ever seen what lies beyond these walls, but because, even in ancient Rome, nothing truly disappears, everything leaves a trace, and centuries later, those traces are still being found. The morning begins like any other, soft light through the high window, the distant turning of keys, the slow rhythm of guards moving through stone corridors. But today, there is a different kind of silence among the prisoners. It is not fear, not hope, something quieter, curiosity. The elderly soldier is the one who starts speaking. I once heard scholars come through ruins. He says slowly, no one interrupts. They were not soldiers, not officials. He pauses, as if choosing the right memory. They looked at broken stone like it was speaking. You imagine that for a moment. Stone speaking. Ancient Rome was so vast, so layered, that even its prisons did not vanish completely. Over time, buildings collapsed, were buried, rebuilt, or repurposed. Yet fragments remained beneath soil, streets, and newer cities built on top of old foundations. Centuries later, archaeologists would uncover those fragments, not always dramatically, sometimes quietly: a wall, a stairway, a rusted iron ring still fixed into ancient stone. The dock worker listens carefully. You mean they found places like this? He asks. The soldier nods. Not exactly the same, but close enough. Archaeology has revealed that Roman prisons were often built from durable materials like volcanic stone and concrete. Structures near major cities, especially in Rome itself, were deeply integrated into the urban landscape. Some parts of ancient prisons still exist today beneath modern streets, hidden below layers of later construction. The Mamertine prison, for example, is one of the most well-known surviving sites associated with ancient confinement. Visitors can still descend into its lower chamber, where cold stone walls and narrow spaces reflect descriptions passed down through history. There are no grand decorations there, only structure, function, silence. Inside your cell, the political prisoner speaks quietly. So it was real, he says, not a question, more like confirmation. The soldier replies, very real. That changes something in the room, because suddenly, the prison is no longer just your present. It becomes part of a much longer timeline, a place that existed before you, and will likely exist, in memory or structure, long after you are gone. Archaeologists studying ancient Rome often find more than just buildings. They find evidence of daily life, pottery fragments, inscriptions carved into stone, chains, tools, sometimes even graffiti scratched into prison walls by prisoners who never expected anyone to read their words again. Simple messages, names, dates, small declarations of existence. I was here. The merchant lowers his voice. Do they know what it felt like? He asks. No one answers immediately, because that question is harder. It is one thing to find stone, another to understand fear, or waiting, or silence measured in days that feel longer than months. The soldier finally says, they can guess. A pause, but they will never fully know. Outside, Rome continues to bury itself in time. One generation builds over another. Temples become ruins. Ruins become foundations. Foundations become streets. And beneath all of it, remnants remain. Inside the prison, you begin to understand something subtle. Your experience, as heavy as it feels, is not separate from history. It is part of it. One day, long after emperors are forgotten and laws rewritten, someone may stand above these very stones and wonder who once lived beneath them, what they feared, what they hoped for, what they lost. As the afternoon light shifts, dust floats slowly through the beam entering your cell. For a moment, it feels like time itself is visible. The young political prisoner speaks again. If they find this place someday, he says softly, what will they think of us? The soldier exhales, probably that we were like everyone else. No glory, no legend, just people waiting inside stone walls. Even that thought brings a strange calm, because it removes the idea that suffering is separate from human history. It places it within it. As evening approaches, the prison returns to its familiar rhythm. Chains settle, doors close, voices fade, but something has changed slightly in how you see it. The walls are no longer only barriers, they are records, not written in ink, but in stone. And somewhere far beyond your time, someone will read them. The prison feels different now, not because anything inside it has changed, but because something inside you has. The walls are still stone, the doors are still iron, the guards still move with the same steady rhythm through the corridors, yet the silence no longer feels like emptiness, it feels like understanding. You have lived long enough within these walls to recognize their language. The turning of keys is no longer just sound, it is routine. The distant footsteps are no longer just movement, they are structure. Even the darkness at night feels less like an ending, and more like part of a cycle that repeats without concern for those inside it, somewhere beyond this prison. Rome continues its endless life, not paused, not waiting, just existing. Markets opening under warm morning light, citizens walking through marble streets, soldiers standing beneath banners that have seen generations rise and fall, and somewhere in that vast city, your fate is being decided. But even that thought feels distant now, like something happening to another version of yourself. Inside your cell, the elderly soldier sits quietly, not speaking at first, just watching the faint light shift across the floor. Then he finally says, when I was young, I thought survival meant strength. No one interrupts. He continues slowly, now I think it meant understanding what you can endure. The words settle into the room gently, not as wisdom trying to teach, but as experience simply being shared. Across the cell, the merchant leans back against the stone. The dock worker folds his arms. The young political prisoner looks toward the small window above, each of them imagining something different: freedom, loss, return, uncertainty. And you realize something quietly. Survival in ancient Rome was never the same for everyone. It depended on status, on circumstance, on timing, on luck, on who heard your name spoken in the right room at the right moment. Some people left prisons like this and returned to their lives unchanged. Others left them into exile, some into slavery, some never left at all. And yet, for many prisoners, the most difficult part was not the outcome itself, it was the waiting before it, the suspended time between accusation and judgment, a life reduced to anticipation. The dock worker breaks the silence. Do you think we'll remember this? He asks quietly. No one answers immediately, because memory is not simple here. A days blend together, yet certain moments remain sharp. A sound, a conversation, a moment of unexpected calm. The soldier finally replies, we don't choose what we remember, he says, we only live through it. Outside, the prison continues its quiet rhythm, but something in the air feels softer now, less like confinement, more like observation, as if even the stone itself has stopped pressing quite so heavily. You lie down on the straw one final time, not with the same tension as before, but with a strange stillness. Because the question that once felt terrifying no longer feels sharp. Would you survive ancient Rome? You begin to understand the answer is not simple. Survival is not just escaping death, it is adapting to time, to silence, to uncertainty, to systems far larger than yourself. And as your eyes begin to close, you realize something even more unsettling. You already did survive it, not by leaving, but by enduring. The prison does not disappear, Rome does not slow down, and history does not pause for anyone inside its walls, but somewhere beyond all of it, life continues its endless rhythm, and in that rhythm, your story becomes just one among many, fading, yet never entirely forgotten.